On Africa 24 English, the African Union Journal is presented to you by Afreximbank.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of the African Union Journal. Agriculture remains the backbone of Africa's socio-economic transformation, yet its potential is often constrained by fragmented markets. This issue examines how rural development and integrated agricultural value chains serves as the primary engine for achieving Agenda 2063. By linking smallholder farmers to regional markets via the AfCFTA, Africa can move from subsistence to a competitive, industrialized and agro-economy. To dissect these stakes, ladies and gentlemen, report and analysis follows shortly. In Africa, rural development is emerging as the key driver of inclusive growth, given that the majority of the population still lives outside urban centers. Faced with low agricultural yields, a lack of infrastructure, and limited access to electricity, governments are stepping up their efforts to transform rural areas in light of the scale of the challenges involved in achieving truly balanced development. More on this report with Marie-Raphaël Antolo.
In many African countries, rural development remains a central focus of public policy. With nearly 60% of the continent's population still living in rural areas, governments face a dual challenge, reducing territorial inequalities while fostering inclusive economic growth. Between policy ambitions and structural constraints, the strategies implemented reveal a highly uneven landscape.
Tipo de actividades de desarrollo, pero tenemos que tener el coraje de aceptar que el progreso ha sido demasiado lento y no se ha priorizado la tarea de la tarea y el programa de redistribución.
There can be no food security if agriculture is controlled by multinational corporations. If we do not address the land issue, we will never solve the climate issue. And if we do not solve the climate issue, we must consider our struggle because, for centuries and also after the aggressive machinery of apartheid from 1948 to 1993, the African majority systematically lost its rights, eventually being displaced from 18% of the land.
Ellos son los que claramente pueden demostrar cómo tienen ese potencial para ser pequeños productores de alimentos con éxito, personas éxito.
The agricultural sector, a true pillar of the rural economy, employs about 60% of the active workforce, but contributes only 15 to 20% of the continent's GDP. This gap highlights a significant productivity deficit. It is further compounded by a critical lack of funding, particularly for infrastructure, estimated at between $68 and $108 billion per year. In this context, public policies oscillate between a drive for transformation and persistent structural constraints.
Nous avons de l'eau.
We have significant water resources, including rivers and abundant water, but we are not yet able to set up small-scale systems to generate electricity in our villages. This is the issue we want to address in order to contribute to revitalization of rural areas. In this context, we are already installing water supply systems in several villages to improve people's living conditions. We are also working to improve housing.
Arranger l'habitat.
Faced with these challenges, some states are stepping up investments in infrastructure, particularly rural roads. According to the African Development Bank, improving transport networks could reduce post-harvest losses by 15 to 20%. However, regional disparities remain significant. In Central Africa, the Rural Accessibility Index is among the lowest in the world. The World Bank estimates that fewer than 25% of rural population live within 2 kilometers of an all-season road.
A physical asset. It is a foundation for economic productivity, a source of livelihood, a vehicle for investment, a store of wealth, and a cornerstone for national development. However, land can only deliver value when it is properly administered, professionally managed, transparently allocated, and sustainably utilized.
At the same time, rural electrification is progressing, but at a pace that remains insufficient to meet demand. According to the International Energy Agency, electricity access in rural areas of sub-Saharan Africa stands at between 25% and 30% compared with over 70% in urban areas. This significant gap is slowing the development of local processing activities and limiting value creation in rural regions.
Improved access to rural areas is increasingly seen as vital for inclusive development across several African nations. Significant portions of the rural populace still lack adequate basic infrastructure. Consequently, governments are ramping up programs aimed at modernizing these regions and boosting connectivity. The overreacting objective is to diminish inequalities and inject sustained momentum into local economies. Details with Christian Belabo.
Improving connectivity in rural areas across Africa remains a strategic priority to reduce territorial inequalities and accelerate inclusive development. Across the continent, nearly 60 to 70% of rural population still have limited access to basic infrastructure. This shortfall hampers the movement of goods and people, as well as access to essential services, significantly limiting local economic opportunities.
Qu'est-ce que nous voulons faire réellement?
What do we really want to achieve in rural areas? The first priority is to improve roads. Agricultural feeder roads, as provided for by law, are at the heart of our priorities. We are working with our sisters and brothers, honorable members of parliament and senators, so that in the future we can truly speak of rural roads that meet the needs of local populations.
Députés et sénateurs, pour voir que dans l'avenir, qu'on parle des routes rurales.
To address these challenges, road and logistic development programs are being implemented. These notably include the rehabilitation and construction of more than 5,000 kilometers of rural roads under certain national programs, as well as the introduction of transport solutions suited to agricultural areas. These investments aim to reduce transport costs by 20 to 30% and facilitate the movement of agricultural products to markets.
Pour la plupart de ces routes qui sont réhabilitées, nous avons ce qu'on appelle le fonds d'entretien.
It is true that today, with the unification of public funds, discussions are underway for the Road Maintenance Fund to regain its autonomy in order to finance and facilitate road maintenance.
Routiers redeviennent autonomes afin de financer, de faciliter l'entretien des routes.
Rural development is not limited to roads. Public policies also incorporate access to drinking water for nearly 80% of targeted villages, strengthening education and expanding access to energy in remote areas. Local cooperatives are also being supported to create thousands of jobs with a medium-term objective of reducing rural poverty by an estimated 15 to 25%.
En plus des routes qu'on apporte, c'est de voir comment on améliore le cadre de vie.
In addition to the roads we are developing, the aim is to see how to improve living conditions and the activities of rural populations. The immediate means of transport project identified in this context seeks to determine which type of equipments can be made available to rural populations in order to facilitate their mobility.
Pour leur faciliter leur activité de tous les jours.
African authorities aim to sustainably transform rural areas into dynamic economic hubs. By 2030, the objective is to significantly reduce the gap between urban and rural areas, with an overall improvement in access services estimated at more than 50% in targeted regions.
Africa faces a critical dependency. Over 80% of its fertilizers are imported to meet an annual consumption of 30 million tons. This vulnerability exposes farmers to fluctuations in global prices and geopolitical crises, putting seeds that harvest at risk. Through the construction of local factories and the rise of organic fertilizers, the continent is seeking to secure its supply and make its agriculture more self-sufficient and sustainable.
In Africa, over 80% of fertilizers are imported, leaving farmers vulnerable to global price fluctuations. With 30 million tons consumed each year, price rises exacerbated by the war in Ukraine and trade disruptions such as those around the Strait of Hormuz are putting local farms under severe pressure. We have introduced the bulk purchasing process to buy fertilizer in bulk. We will, for example, be importing 120,000 tons of urea Simply by buying in bulk, we have saved around 600 million, which goes straight into the farmers' pockets. We have also optimized and renegotiated the terms with the ICS. On every ton of NPK fertilizers, we will save about 5,000 to 10,000. So with these innovations alone, the savings in purchases alone exceeds 1 billion. Ethiopia, one of Africa's largest consumers of fertilizers with 2.32 million tons imported in 2024, is facing shortage of inputs in the middle of a planting season, prompting the government to implement emergency measures to supply farmers. Initiatives such as the construction of a large nitrogen fertilizer plant with an annual capacity of 3 million tons by Aliko Dangote aims to boost local production, reduce reliance on imports and improve supplies.
In response to the challenge due to the war, which prevents no more supply of fertilizers to Africa. So that's how we came in Zimbabwe. IFFM work in Zimbabwe using an instrument called partial trade credit guarantees for a value of 4.3 million US dollars.
Beyond large-scale factories, Africa is increasingly turning to sustainable agricultural solutions. The market for organic fertilizers and biofertilizers reached nearly $287 million in 2024 and is expected to grow to $420 million by 2029, reflecting a growing interest in these inputs suited to African soils. These solutions improve soil fertility while reducing the carbon footprint.
One is of urea, which is fertilizer that we have. I think in the last couple of days we've been loading to mostly African countries, which we were not doing before.
To support this transition, training programs in 19 African countries are helping farmers and young agri-tech entrepreneurs to adopt composting, green manure, and agroecology. Against a backdrop of global instability, experts stress the urgent need for Africa to strengthen its self-sufficiency in agricultural inputs through ambitious policies, robust infrastructure, and public partnerships.
And to this week's regional news featured by Sarah Ajay looks at Somalia, who is strengthening social cohesion amongst refugee and internally displaced persons by mobilizing communities in Mogadishu. The EAC is adopting the One Health approach to strengthen pandemic preparedness. And we have the SADC, who is accelerating the rollout of collective medical procurement with a 40% reduction in medicine costs.
From April 2 to 4, 2026, in Somalia, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, and the National Commission for Refugees and Internally Displaced Persons, NCRI, held a Swedish-funded workshop to promote social cohesion. The initiative, supported by the Protection and Solutions for Displaced Persons, PSSDP, project gathered refugees, internally displaced persons, and host communities for dialogues, capacity buildings, and community activities, including a football match. Participants addressed mass displacement challenges, stressing the need to build trust, mutual understanding, and collaboration. Leaders emphasized investing in conflict resolution and sustainable community networks. Attendees committed to ongoing cooperation and peaceful coexistence in Somalia, which hosts over 46,000 refugees and has more than 3.5 million internally displaced people. Meeting in Nairobi on March 31, 2026, the Secretariat of the East African Community, EAC, held the third regional meeting of One Health stakeholders to strengthen regional capacity to prevent, detect, and respond to health threats. The initiative forms part of the 2022-2027 Regional One Health Strategy, which integrates human, animal, and environmental health for coordinated action. Participants representing partner states, academia, civil society, and international partners identified key priorities, including the central role of the EAC Secretariat, the establishment of cross-sectoral exchange mechanism, and the development of the regional workforce skills. The discussions highlighted the importance of a multi-sectoral approach in the context marked by the adoption of the Pandemic Agreement by the World Health Organization, supported by the PAN-PrEP project funded by the German BMZ. The meeting concluded with a commitment to implement these measures in a coordinated, evidence-based manner focused on concrete results. From March 30 to 31, 2026, the SADC Secretariat and the United Republic of Tanzania brought together experts and officials to make progress on the implementation of the Shared Procurement Services, SPPS. The aim is to integrate the SADC medicines database and the electronic system to create a regional platform for collective procurement. The mechanism is expected to reduce the cost of medicines by up to 40%, strengthening member states' bargaining power and improving the availability of essential medicines. Tanzania, which has hosted the SPPS since 2017, highlighted its technological advances and its leading role in the project. Discussions focus on system modernization, data transparency, and the development of common regulatory frameworks. 8 countries have already carried out assessment and training to prepare for implementation. Officials emphasized the importance of addressing technical gaps and strengthening regional cooperation. The meeting concluded with a commitment to make SPPS fully operational by the end of 2026, ensuring expanded and secure access to essential medicines across the region.
Following the proceedings held from the 23rd to the 28th of March in Abuja, the AACIS 2026 Summit endorsed a renewed and resolutely action-oriented vision for cooperation between Africa and the Caribbean. Under the theme One Voice, One Vision, Advancing Afro-Caribbean Unity, participants agreed to establish a structural partnership aimed at making the Afro-Caribbean corridor a sustainable driver of development, inclusion, and improved access to essential services. Sarah Yemele tells us more on this.
The Afro-Caribbean Investment Summit, AXIS 2026, highlights the central role of agriculture in struggling a transatlantic investment corridor in response to the challenges of food security and inclusive growth. According to the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, the value of global agricultural production is expected to increase by around 14% by 2032. This momentum will be driven by more than 80% from Africa and Latin America, strengthening their position as strategic hubs for international investment.
We have also done something in innovation. You see, a lot of people have said to me that there's no traffic in the Caribbean to come to Africa. A lot of people had said that Africans don't want to go to the Caribbean. They just want their passports, and when they're ready, they'll go and party. And we did the first flight as proof of concept that business people want to go to the Caribbean, and they did.
Recent data from the World Food Programme confirms the scale of the challenges. In 2024, around 343 million people worldwide face acute food insecurity, while between 713 and 757 million suffered from hunger. At the same time, the World Food Programme assisted more than 150 million beneficiaries in 2023, illustrating the importance of strengthening agricultural system to sustainably meet growing food needs.
It doesn't always mean money in terms of cash and bank accounts. Means to put in the work where you have declared that the work should be put in. So it's action and not talk.
From this perspective, the Afro-Caribbean Investment Summit AXIS 2026 underscores the need to mobilize structural investments to transform agricultural value chains. In sub-Saharan Africa, agriculture accounts on average for nearly 23% of gross domestic product and employs more than 60% of the active population, according to the World Bank. The development of a transatlantic corridor therefore appears as a strategic lever to stimulate trade, strengthen the resilience of food systems, and support sustainable economic growth.
We have a bigger advantage to try to, come together and develop our agriculture sector together, where things that we have comprised advantages for in Nigeria can go to Caribbean for processing, and all the way to, the global north, the Americas, and even Europe as finished products, where we both, have beneficiation and we will both profit from it. So for us, we need to deepen the trade and increase, bilateral trades from $4.8 billion to at least $20 billion. And agriculture stands, as one of that big contributor to that.
The 2026 Summit of the Atlantic African Cooperation and Investment Strategy, AXIS, highlights agriculture's pivotal role as a fundamental driver of economic cooperation across the Atlantic. in addressing critical needs such as food security, job creation, and sustainable development. The establishment of a strengthened agricultural investment corridor offers a tangible solution to current global imbalances. Nevertheless, its success hinges on the coordinated efforts of both public and private stakeholders, the securing of necessary financing, and a shared commitment to a long-term strategic vision.
The Zimbabwe International Trade Fair will take place in Bulawayo from the 20th to the 25th of April 2026, with a focus on innovation and regional integration. This year's event promises to be the key hub for trade in Southern Africa. More than just an exhibition, this event serves as a barometer of the country's industrial health. Over 6 days, the Bulawayo Exhibition Center will welcome policymakers, international investors, and business leaders to discuss key sectors: mining, agriculture, and cutting-edge technologies. The Imperial City of Magnes will host the 18th edition of the International Agricultural Fair of Morocco from the 20th to the 26th of April 2026 as a leading event on the continent. This edition will focus on climate adaptation and cutting-edge agricultural technologies. Beyond the exhibition itself, CIEM 2026 is establishing itself as a powerful economic driver by bringing together more than 60 countries and thousands of exhibitors. The fair aims to boost Moroccan exports and forge South-South partnerships with food security. The 12th African Regional Forum of Sustainable Development is scheduled to take place in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia from 28th to 30th April 2026. The event is held annually to provide for integrated monitoring and review of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Objectives of the African Union's Agenda 26 to 30 Africa Rewind of the African Union. The 12th session of the forum will be held under the theme Turning the Tide, Transformative and Coordinated Action for the 2030 Agenda and Agenda 2063.
On February 14, 2026, the African Union entrusted Albert Shingiro with a delicate mission in Libreville and Malabo. Drawing on his exemplary diplomatic career, the former Burundian Minister of Foreign Affairs is tasked with facilitating the implementation of the International Court of Justice ruling between Gabon and Equatorial Guinea. His mission reflects the AU's confidence in his experience and diplomatic skills and highlights the importance of proactive African diplomacy for regional stability.
Albert Shingiro, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Burundi, was appointed on February 14, 2026 as Special Envoy of the African Union to Gabon and Equatorial Guinea. He will assist the two countries in implementing the International Court of Justice May 19, 2025 ruling concerning the land and maritime boundary, as well as a sovereignty over the Banier, Konga, and Kokoteros Islands. His mission is to facilitate dialogue, ensure respect for international law, and promote the peaceful implementation of the judgment. This appointment reflects the African Union's confidence in his experience and diplomatic skills. We must act individually and collectively to address today's global challenges with calm and determination in order to build a peaceful, stable, prosperous, and united world, and to protect future generations from the horrors of war and the dark repetitions of history that humanity experienced on the eve of the creation of our common organization. A career diplomat, 55-year-old Albert Shingiro has nearly 20 years of international experience. He has served as counselor and in charge of affairs at the UN ambassador and later as Burundi's Minister of Foreign Affairs, consistently working to address major global challenges. A polyglot recognized for his firm and persuasive speeches, he defends his country's interests while contributing to the building of a peaceful and united world. The political will of all stakeholders, the respect of commitments at every level, and the fight against terrorism are the only sure and sustainable path to ensure that this pact is not just another document, but rather a compass guiding us all toward a peaceful, inclusive, prosperous, and united world in the interest of current and future generations. In his new role as Special Envoy, Albert Shingiro will lead the necessary consultations to find common ground between Libreville and Malabo. The challenge is to translate the court's decision into concrete actions while strengthening regional stability and fostering good neighborly relations. His mission could serve as an example of proactive African diplomacy based on dialogue and cooperation.
Nous devons respecter les engagements pris dans les forats régionaux et internationaux.
We must honor the commitments made in regional and international forums, whether regarding the protection of the planet, the promotion of peace and international security, human rights, digital cooperation, the fight against all forms of exclusion, the establishment of trust, or the comprehensive reform of global governance to make it more legitimate, inclusive, effective, and better adapted to the realities of the contemporary world.
Efficace et plus adapté aux réalités du monde contemporain.
Albert Shingiro embodies a generation of skilled, experienced, and committed African diplomats. His mission in Gabon and Equatorial Guinea reflects a career dedicated to diplomacy and the peaceful resolution of conflicts, confirming his key role in strengthening stability across the continent.
Transforming rural Africa requires shifting from raw production to high-value processing. While significant strides have been made under the CAADP framework, closing the gaps in infrastructure, digital inclusion, and post-harvest logistics remains critical. Ultimately, a prosperous Africa depends on its ability to add value to its soil, ensuring that agricultural growth translates into sustainable livelihoods for all rural communities. As we draw curtains on this program, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for more upcoming news bulletin on Africa 24 English.
On Africa 24 English, the African Union Journal is presented to you by Afrexim Bank.